From Ohio to North Dakota, protesters at the North Dakota pipeline have officially been handed their eviction notice. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has set a December 5th deadline for Native Americans and others to leave all federal lands north of the Cannonball River for, quote, safety concerns. Initially, the Corps said it would not remove protesters of the $3.8 billion pipeline, given the First Amendment freedom of speech, but clashes between protesters and police, especially in the last couple of days, have turned more dire and violent as officers use tear gas, rubber bullets, water hoses in freezing weather to deter the demonstrators. Let's bring in somebody who has had to deal with backlash over the proposed Keystone pipeline, which would run through his state of Nebraska. Nebraska Governor Pete Ricketts joining us in a Fox Business exclusive. Good to see you, Governor.
Thank you for having me on, Liz.
Oh, look, having witnessed pipeline politics in Nebraska, how cautious must North Dakota be?
Well, certainly you want to take into consideration the views of the folks who are being impacted here. And that has happened. The 55 tribes have met with the Army Corps of Engineers over 200 times and have filed numerous comments on the route of the pipeline. In fact, the route of the pipeline has been moved. And so there has been a lot of dialogue already. I also note that Dakota Access, the pipeline company, has requested to meet with the tribe 7 times, have been refused. So I think it is important to try and open dialogue, but in the case here with these protesters, clearly they're acting outside the law. They're trespassing on private property. They're blocking public roadways. They're burning cars. They're throwing rocks and bottles at law enforcement officers. This is something that, again, this is outside the rule of law and outside the way that we actually resolve these sorts of issues.
Yeah, I mean, look, we feel for people who are worried about their drinking water and worried about certain important sites that matter to their people, but Energy Transfer Partners had gotten federal permits, followed those rules. I suppose you do have to, when we're talking as a business network here, look at the oil and the pipeline and all that's going through it. Be careful what you wish for, because this, along with Keystone, let's say all of this energy starts coursing through and Keystone eventually perhaps becomes a reality, considering Donald Trump says he's going to do it. The price continues to go down. Are you worried about then the unintended consequences for the business community, that then you start to see a lot of these companies go under because the price is too low for them to make a profit?
Well, from the standpoint of how the market works, I mean, this is something that, this is why we have a vibrant free enterprise system, is that companies take risks. If they make bad risks, then, of course, they need to have those consequences. That's part of how we have that check and balance in our market system. So I really don't get too concerned about the price of oil getting low. I really expect the companies to take that risk, and that they're the ones that are going to be deciding whether or not to invest based upon what they think the return can be. You know, our job in government is to make sure we create a level playing field, that we're protecting the environment, issuing the permits as appropriate and that sort of thing, and of course keeping the public safety.
All right, I need to get to this because you just got back from China. Nebraska does a lot of business with China when it comes to agriculture, but you signed 9 letters of intent with the Chinese on everything from I suppose, food, with food importers, hotels, restaurant suppliers. Sounds like a productive mission for you, just at a time where Donald Trump has said that he might impose tariffs. What would you say to the president-elect about that?
Well, I think what you've heard from the president-elect is that he wants to make sure we've got a level playing field, that American companies ought to be able to have access to Chinese markets if Chinese companies are going to have access to American markets. And, of course, that's what our trade mission was all about, was trying to establish those connections. We met with hundreds of Chinese business leaders through our promotional events. You mentioned the letters of intent we signed. One of our companies, Preferred Popcorn, extended their deal with their Chinese partner to sell up to 10 million more pounds of popcorn in China. So we were really looking to develop those connections. And really, I think that's what Mr. Trump is looking for, is to say, how can we make sure we're having a level playing field for everybody involved? And, of course, to be able to get that, you've got to negotiate, and you certainly start at the, you don't start at the place you hope to end in a negotiation.
To be clear, Governor, you signed letters of intent. You must feel that you had a level playing field in dealing with your Chinese counterparts there.
Well, actually, in the case of those letters of intent, many of them were for the beef that we want to sell into China. China still doesn't allow our U.S. beef to be sold in China. Now, because of the one country, two systems, we actually export a lot of our beef to Hong Kong, and Hong Kong is actually one of our largest beef markets. But the beef market has gone in China just over the last 5 years from about 139 million to 2.5 billion,
Gotcha.
But none of that is U.S. beef. So we want to encourage the Chinese to open up that beef market so we can really take advantage of that growing middle class in China. And that's what I think Mr. Trump is looking for, is to help us get that level playing field.
They are missing out if they haven't had steak from Omaha. That's all I have to say. Governor, thanks.